Pleased to present Austin Faith Dialogue, brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries. In the weeks ahead, you will see these and other programs by various denominations.
Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs program at the crossroads of religion and life. A series of programs highlighting the social and cultural interaction between the worshiping and larger communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Area Conference of Churches in cooperation with KTBC. Join us now in today's Austin Faith Dialogue.
There are lots of stories that you can tell, or you can sing. Today we're going to sing a story. This story is an old story about a man named Zacchaeus.
I know.
You know that song? Then you can help me sing. We're going to sing this story together. Here we go. Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. He climbed up in the sycamore tree, for he wanted his one to see. And when the Lord came passing by, he looked up in the tree, and he said, Zacchaeus, you come down, for I'm coming to your house today. For I'm going to your house today. Wonderful. That was a great story. Thanks for singing it along with me.
I see you at Maria.
Hello. Welcome to Austin Faith Dialogue. I'm Carl Gronberg, pastor of Gethsemane Lutheran, and your host for today's program. Our topic today on Austin Faith Dialogue is something I'm very excited about, story. Stories come in many forms: music, prose, poem, dance, gesture, because story reflects life. Guests on our program today will talk about story and its value, importance, and significance in your life and in mine. May I introduce our guests to you? Our first is Marion Barnes. She is an independent storyteller who was recently designated as Austin's honorary storyteller. And Kim Lehman is a children's storyteller with the Austin Public Library. Also joining us today is Reverend Vance Daniel, a retired pastor of the Lutheran tradition. Welcome to all of you. I'm glad to have you in the program. And Kim, with those children at the very beginning, what an exciting way to begin Austin Faith Dialogue. And Marion's going to close us off today with another exciting time of sharing with the children. But let's talk about story. Marion, if you were going to define story, if someone said, what is story, how would you define it?
Well, I always bless Alex Haley, who answered that question for me, and I quote him directly. He said that storytelling and story is the genesis of all knowledge, and I agree completely. It's the basis of all knowledge.
That's pretty impressive credentials, if you ask me, if he said that.
Exactly.
Kim, how about you? If you were going to say, this is story or storytelling, how would you answer that?
A story is something that everybody has. We all have our own story to tell and our own stories to listen to each other. And when you do that, it creates communication and peace among everybody.
We want to pursue that with you today, you and Marion and Vance, to talk about the fact that everybody has story, and that if we deal with our story, there's great value in terms of the way we see ourselves and the way we relate to our environment and the people around us. Now let's get the theologian's point of view. Pastor Daniel, how do you define story?
A friend of mine has a 3-year-old girl, and she hides behind the curtain when he comes home and says to him, "Here comes the big bad wolf." She is processing her whole 3-year-old world through a story. And therefore, she demands it be told the same way every time.
All right, that's great. Taking that story she's heard and known and putting it into her life today. Marion, how about your story? Before we went on the air, you told me some about your story. You have a fascinating story.
And a long one.
You said that, Marion.
Yes. I grew up in a community where storytelling was a way of life. We went to a tiny little church. It was in a house. The pastor was in the kitchen preaching, and the rest of us were in the living room listening. And not enough money to go to theaters and so on for entertainment, so the adults told stories to children and taught us how to tell stories. That's when I first began to tell stories, told them through grade school, and became a professional storyteller in the 70s by way of a radio book.
I want to go back, though, when you were a child. As you sat there listening to those stories, what happened to you as those stories would be told by the pastor, the clergy person, the reverend, whatever was name or title? What happened to you as you heard those stories?
Well, it would take you into another dimension. You were there. I particularly think of the story poems that were popular then. Paul Laurence Dunbar used to be a great mainstay. And they tell us one of his stories, say The Party, and you are just in the post-Civil War days in a poor family situation, and they knew how to have a party nonetheless.
Yes.
And you would, the storyteller, it goes on for maybe 4, 5, 6 pages, and it's memorized, but you are completely there. Now, I've learned to tell that story, and people tell me that they hate for it to end because they don't want to come back. You know, they're enjoying themselves. And this is what storytelling did to me as a child.
They become a part of the story itself.
Part of that story.
I want to talk to you about how you became a professional storyteller in the 70s, also some of the experiences that you've had, but thanks for sharing that insight into your past. And Kim, how about you? What's your story like? Tell us about your story.
I grew up in a small hollow in Pennsylvania called Soap Hollow.
Say again, what kind of hollow?
Soap Hollow.
Soap Hollow.
That's the name of it. And I grew up Mennonite. So all my relatives were in the same valley on my mother's side and my father's side. So I grew up around all my relatives and all the generations. And my father is a wonderful storyteller. It just makes you laugh, and the words that he would use were just wonderful, and my great aunt also. So I was around stories of my own history and my own past.
How many children in your family?
Only 3.
3 of you. Don't say only. I think it's pretty good. All right.
Lots of cousins.
Yeah. And so when you would gather as a family together, that you would tell stories maybe of the one in the family who didn't quite live up to the expectations of the rest of the family. You'd tell stories of the family life?
Hunting stories and things that we would do, you remember when. Because you remember your stories when you can tell them to one another and when you know people are interested in them. And every time you tell them again, you know, don't tell a story unless you can embellish it.
Sure. Add a little bit to it.
Right.
Vance, how about you? Your story. Where does story become important to you?
I grew up in the bosom of the church, a small, close-knit community, and the life of the community was built around the church and particularly preaching. The preacher was the topic of discussion at Sunday dinner at least, and the stories were the things that lasted. Those were the impressions that were made and the new vistas that were opened. The good preacher was then, as now, a good storyteller.
It gave to the community that you were a part of then, Vance, a texture, a unity, a sense of being, an identity that was all a part of it because of the story and because of the experience liturgically with the preacher.
Exactly.
Marion, in the 70s, you became a professional storyteller. What are some of the experiences that you've had in storytelling, and what are some of the benefits of story?
There are benefits both for the storyteller and for the listening audience, and they're rich. I think that one of the reasons I tell stories is to remind parents of the value of storytelling as a teaching mechanism. It shares your values with the values of a child. If you say, don't do this and do that, it goes right through one ear, or maybe even around one ear, not in one and out the other. But if you put it in a story, that lasts. That lasts. I remember stories now. Much of what I operate on now is based on stories from my childhood.
You know, you mentioned to me when we were talking prior to the television program about your dad. Was he a storyteller?
Oh, the world's best.
You and Kim are going to have to battle that out. She says her dad's the best. But be that as it may.
He was fascinating. He was a minister, and he was a storyteller both in the pulpit and out. And each storyteller, whether that person is a professional or not, is different. He had the ability to spellbind an audience for, you know, half an hour.
Yes.
And I've seen him do that just using one phrase, saying it in different ways. And you'd sit there and you'd laugh. You wouldn't even know why you were laughing. But that's that storyteller's fire coming through, and he was the kind that laughed as well. And you could just enjoy him. I enjoy the memory of him till this day. And much of my storytelling, I found out by accident. I think I'm thinking of myself almost as my father. When I was doing the party once, I mentioned that earlier, and someone said, that old lady was really something else. So I said, it's not an old lady, it's an old man. And then she said, well, to me, it's a lady. And then I stopped because I realized, well, she had every reason to think it was a lady. I'm a lady telling the story. Exactly. And Dunbar never says whether it's male or female. But in my mind, I think that's a carryover from my dad, you know, as he told the story.
You are your father's daughter.
I am.
And as he told stories, so you picked up that same
Exactly.
and tell stories. And the value is that children and parents find a connectedness in that story. Rather than saying, I want you to do this.
Yes.
You tell a story and a value.
And share it. It's bonding. It establishes the bond between the parent and the child.
One of the things that's a part of, one of the elements, I guess, Marion, that's a part of my story, is the bonding. When mother or father would put me to bed at night as a child that I still remember and tell stories. Bedtime prayers were a part of the story. And just that intimacy, that sense of security and belonging. This was my family, and there might be wild bears out there or anything to come in, but they couldn't get me because I was safe. The story that was being told gave me a sense of safety. Kim, what about value of stories, not only to children, but to adults? What are some of the values that adults receive from telling story and knowing their story?
One thing that I see with stories that I'm beginning to understand is that stories are so involved. And you understand a little bit of it. And then a year or two later, you understand a little bit more. And then another year later, you understand a little bit more. And the story comes back to you, and it keeps coming back. And it comes back when you need it. You know, it's not arbitrary, and you remember it. You know, the same thing that Marion was talking about, that, you know, you can tell somebody something, but they're not really going to hear it unless you put it into a story. If it's something that has to do with imagination or creative thinking or morals or how to live or cleverness or whatever it is. And when you hear that story, it comes back to you.
I like that idea. I like the idea of the process of story. Because the reason I'm excited about this program and the reason I want to say to the viewing audience, this is good stuff, is because it seems to me that if we get into our story, we begin to know more about ourselves and then those around us, and it gives to us that sense of value, and we live out our story. Which, Vance, brings me to you from a theological point of view. How about those stories, those ancient stories that the preacher or the rabbi would tell the community of faith? What are some of those ancient stories that become a part of our life today?
It seems to me that these stories build community, Carl.
Yes.
And at the very heart of the gospel story, the transfiguration of Jesus is described in terms of his exodus, which he is going to accomplish in Jerusalem. Jesus himself is reliving the Moses story. He has built into that community and been incorporated into it by listening to the story. He has become a part of that tradition. He is changed by it. The smallest child at Passover walks through the walls of the waters of the Red Sea and is a part of that brave community that marches into the Promised Land. That's what story does for you.
It seems to me that as the parents share that Passover story, that they relive that story with their family and connect themselves with what the ancients did thousands of years before, and that becomes a part of the reality of the present, of the now.
Correct.
And for the Old Testament community, I think that's true. What about the New Testament community? What are some of the events from the past, those old stories that become a part of the now? In your tradition, how is that lived out?
We follow a church year, and we begin with the preparation for Christmas. And we enter into the birth of Christ, and we enter into the life of Christ, and we enter into the suffering of Christ. And it becomes a part of the pattern by which we live and describes the kind of people we are.
So what you're saying is that the faith community, the New Testament community, tells the story and relives the story as they hear the story read to them Sunday after Sunday or when they gather together for their liturgy. I think that's an important dimension for us to deal with and think about. Marion, you go around as the professional storyteller, as Austin's honorary storyteller. Congratulations. That's a very nice.
I'm very proud of that.
Yes, I'm proud that you're on the program to share that with us. But you have fun with children, and you go to schools and you tell them some stories. Would you maybe tell us about some of the experiences you have with children when you go around and tell them stories?
It's interesting. I do tell stories to children and to adults, and the fascinating things to me is that when children are very young, they're usually brought to the storytelling program by an adult, the teacher, the parent, or whatever. The parent or the adult is always more willing, more ready to get into the story mode than the child is. You have to really work with a child. He's not going to accept anything without question. But with the adult, tell him anything. I'm ready. And then what that adult will often do, see, the child begins to squirm if his attention is not with the program, it goes too long or whatever, and the adult will stop that, stop that. It's not for the benefit of the child, it's that the child is interrupting the story for the adult. So I enjoy that aspect of it, realizing that we are all children when it comes to hearing a story. We all are children.
I'm wondering, Marion, if a child who does that type of thing is saying, I want to be involved in this story. I've got something to add to the story.
Sometimes that's true. Sometimes that's true. But sometimes it can be that the youngster, you haven't caught his attention, or you've caught it and at 3, that's enough. It depends.
Right.
But in every case, it's just a joy to me to see these adults rein them in. Stop that, pay attention. But it's not really that. It's about, you're interrupting my story. The other thing I enjoy about telling a story is how the audience can change your story for you. See, storytelling is an interacting event. It's not that I am telling you a story, it's that we are sharing this moment. And many times a child, and that's when it really gets to me, can bring to your attention something that you had not noticed. And then to me it's thrilling. I've had them change a number of stories on me that I told a certain way over a period of time. And then this youngster will say, well, I don't believe that. I think it should be this way or that way. And in many cases, that child has a point. And so then I change my ending. I give it 2 endings. I said, it used to end this way, but after I talked to this 8-year-old, now you've got the choice of your endings.
A storyteller must be spontaneous. And another thing I think a storyteller must have is your countenance, Mary. To be able to not only with words tell the story, but also with physical and with facial expression be able to tell the story, because the children and even the adults will get involved in the story.
I think it helps. There is something, I've told you, I believe that storytelling in my case, and we must remember that every storyteller has a different story, is a ministry. And I really feel that. And that's a part of it, what you're feeling coming from me.
I want to pursue that. What do you mean, ministry? We often think of ordained people as being ministers. What do you mean, ministry?
All right. To me, a ministry is a commission. In other words, I have objectives. I feel that when I'm with an audience, I always research it. Who's going to be there? What's the social situation? What's the age? What are the needs of the audience? What are the values? Once I know that, then I prepare my stories, just as a minister would do.
I see.
You see, so I prepare a story to satisfy some area of need or want that I recognize in my listening audience. And if I feel I fail to do that, then I've got a hurt. And if I do it well, then there's a joy.
Right.
And I think what you have mentioned, what you feel coming from me, is a part of that. See, it transcends the spoken word. It's something spiritual.
I think that's why story is so important, because it reminds us of our spiritual rootage, Marion.
Exactly.
Kim, how about you? You sang for us at the top of the program, and story, you're with the Austin Public Libraries. What are some of the things you could say to the folks who are watching the program in terms of being a storyteller?
There's lots of things. One thing I was thinking of as Miriam was talking was that to be believable as a storyteller, you have to really enjoy the story, and you have to really understand what the story is about. And sometimes that understanding takes a long time. And that the magic of the story is not so much in the teller as in the story itself.
What do you mean the magic of the story? What do you think the magic of the story? What does that mean, the magic? Is that the mystery, the excitement of the moment, the interaction as Marion talked about?
All of it.
Yeah.
You know, it's all of that. It's what's happening right there. And how it appeals to your heart and your head at the same time.
What do you like best about being a storyteller?
One of the things I like, because I mostly work with children in the libraries, is that I really feel that through telling stories, especially the folk tales, it helps children to work out their own anxieties and their own troubles. And they think differently than we do. They don't think cognitively about, okay, you know, now I understand this, now I'll change this. It just happens. As you tell the story, they work out their own troubles and their own problems.
It brings a sense of peacefulness to people when they can tell a story. Marion, if people wanted to contact you and know more about your story and maybe invite you to come and tell, how would they do that? How would they reach you?
Well, I would suggest that they just telephone area code 512 in the Austin area 442-3928.
And you'd be willing to come and tell some stories, wouldn't you, huh?
I certainly would.
Bible stories?
Yes, I do tell Bible stories. I tell all kinds of stories, as long as they, you know, fit a need that I see, as I told you before, that I sense that the audience, it could be just that they need to laugh. Laughter can be healing.
Therapeutic.
You know? Yes, yes.
Kim, how about you? Invite people to come to the library?
Sure. All the libraries in the Austin area have storytellers or people that do programs for children. So that's a wonderful offering that the city has for children in the
Thanks a lot. And Vance, thank you. And most of all, thank you, our viewing audience, for being with us today on Austin Faith Dialogue. You have a story, and as we close today, we invite you to listen to a story shared by Austin's honorary storyteller, one of our guests today, Marion Barnes.
This is the story of how God made the world.
I know that,
You do?
because you told me.
All right, and we're going to do it again. In the beginning, God made the heaven and he made the earth. And the earth didn't have any shape at that time.
And no people.
No people, nobody was there. And there was darkness on the face of the deep water.
You what?
And God said, let there be light.
You what?
And there was light. What?
But the first creatures were the dinosaurs.
Oh my, this is before the dinosaurs, before anything.
Yeah.
Light came when God said, let there be light. And he said, that's good.
There was only light. There was only God.
Only God. Then he made the light, and he separated the light from the darkness. And he called the light day, and he called the darkness night, and he said, that's good. Then God made the waters come together, and he said they were called the seas, and all of the dry land came into place, and it was called the earth.
God made the dinosaurs.
God made the dinosaurs, he made the earth. That's the stage we are in now.
I got some dinosaur toys.
Good. Then, the earth had its shape,
You what?
and gradually, listen, gradually, God put fish in the waters. He put birds in the air, like we know them now.
You what?
He put animals on the land. And then he put fruit, trees, and everything as well. But the very last thing he created was mankind, men and women. And he said, be fruitful and multiply, so that he meant for them to replenish the earth. So now we have this beautiful earth that God gave us. And we know that God exists, and what? He has the whole world in his hands, does he not? And remember the song we talked about? Let's sing it. He's got the whole world in his hands. 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 He's got you and me, brother. In his hands, he's got you and me, sister. In his hands, he's got you and me, brother. In his hands, he's got the whole world in his hands. And he has the itsy bitsy baby. In his hands, he's got the itsy bitsy baby. In his hands, he's got the itsy bitsy baby. In his hands, he's got the whole world in his hands. Beautiful.
You what those fire things are?
For more information about today's topic, call the Austin Area Conference of Churches at 472-7627.